The silver polish had a sharp, chemical bite that stung the back of Clara's throat, masking the faint, sour odor of the Pinot Grigio left in the glass near the sink. The glass had been sitting there since yesterday afternoon, a thin, yellow ring drying against the crystal. Clara kept her fingers moving in small, rhythmic circles, her thumb pressed into the soft cloth as she rubbed at a stubborn tarnish mark on the back of one of her mother's heavy sterling soup spoons. "No, the silk chiffon is far too heavy for an August evening, Marcus." Eleanor's voice drifted from the hallway, sharp and rapid fire. "It doesn't breathe. If Beatrice sweats through the bodice, the photos are ruined." "Yes, I know the deposit is non-refundable. Just hold on." The click of Eleanor's heels on the French oak floorboards grew louder, then stopped at the threshold of the kitchen. She didn't look at Clara. Instead, her eyes scanned the marble island, landing on the stack of cream-colored envelopes. "Clara, did you call the calligrapher back?" Eleanor asked, her fingers already tapping against the screen of her phone. She didn't wait for an answer before speaking back into her Bluetooth earpiece. "Marcus, I'm still here." "No, we are not doing the lavender. It looks like a funeral. Beatrice wants dusty rose. Or champagne. Clara, where is the swatch book?" Clara didn't look up from the spoon. The dull, heavy ache in her lower back had migrated toward her hips over the last hour, a deep, pulling sensation that reminded her of the cold vinyl table in the clinic 3 days ago. The nurse had told her to expect cramping for up to a week. "Moderate activity is fine," the paper handout had said, tucked now into the bottom of Clara's purse, beneath a stack of Beatrice's RSVP cards. "It's in the blue bin by the pantry, Mom," Clara said. Her voice sounded thin to her own ears, like paper being torn in another room. "What? Speak up, sweetie. Marcus is screaming in my ear," Eleanor muttered, waving a hand dismissively as she walked past the island toward the pantry. "Marcus, look, we'll do the silk fail for the skirts, but the bodice has to be structured. My eldest daughter is not walking down the stairs looking like she's wearing a bedsheet." "Yes, I'll have Clara email you the updated seating chart by 5. The door to the pantry clicked open, then closed. Clara stopped polishing. She looked at the spoon in her hand. Her reflection was warped in the curved, polished metal, her face elongated, her eyes 2 dark, hollow smudges. 3 days. It had been exactly 72 hours since she sat in the sterile warmth of the outpatient pavilion, holding a small plastic cup, waiting for the doctor to confirm what her body had already decided on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m. She had called Eleanor from the parking lot afterward, her voice shaking, asking if Eleanor could drive her home because the cramping made it hard to press the clutch in her car. Eleanor had answered on the 3rd ring, her voice tight with stress because the florist had mixed up the hydrangeas for the rehearsal dinner. "Oh, sweetie, that's terrible. Just terrible. Listen, can you take an Uber? Beatrice is having a literal meltdown at the boutique. They sent the wrong petticoat. I'll call you tonight, okay? Drink some tea." The call had lasted 42 seconds. Eleanor hadn't called that night, or the night after. Instead, she had texted Clara a spreadsheet of the guest list with 3 red question marks next to the name of Beatrice's future mother-in-law. Now, Beatrice herself entered the kitchen, the screen of her iPad glowing against her face. She was wearing a cream cashmere lounge set, her blonde hair pinned up with a claw clip. She smelled of expensive orange blossom perfume and dry shampoo. "Clara, tell me honestly," Beatrice said, sliding onto the bar stool opposite Clara without looking at her. She slid the iPad across the marble. "Is the slit too high? Because Vivian says it makes me look like I'm trying too hard, but Vivian has the aesthetic sensibility of a Midwestern dental hygienist. Look at the drape on the left leg." Clara looked at the screen. A model in an ivory gown posed on a stone staircase, her leg exposed up to the mid-thigh. "It's elegant," Clara said. "Elegant, or trying too hard," Beatrice pressed, her manicured finger tapping the glass, zooming in on the fabric. "Because if I go with the crepe, it won't hold the structure, and the ceremony is outdoors. If there's even a whisper of wind, I'm going to be holding my dress down the entire time, like some low-rent Marilyn Monroe. Did you ask the rental company about the fans?" Clara felt a slow, hot pulse of blood beneath her jeans. She shifted slightly on the wooden stool, the stiff fabric of her jeans pressing uncomfortably against her lower abdomen. She calculated the energy it would take to explain, again, that she hadn't called the rental company because she had spent the previous afternoon sleeping off the anesthesia, her apartment dark, her phone vibrating continuously with notifications from the family group chat about napkin rings. It would take too much. To explain would mean witnessing Beatrice's eyes glaze over, the brief performative sigh of sympathy, followed immediately by, "Well, yes, but we really need those fans locked in by Friday or we lose the group rate." "I'll call them after I finish the silver," Clara said softly. "You're a lifesaver," Beatrice murmured, her eyes already back on her screen, her thumb flicking through photos of satin mules. "Honestly, I don't know how Mom and I would survive this. Julian is absolutely useless. He suggested we use paper napkins for the cocktail hour. Can you believe that? Paper, at a $70,000 event. I told him he might as well ask the caterer to serve hot dogs." Eleanor re-entered the kitchen, holding a thick, plastic-bound binder of fabric swatches. She dropped it onto the island with a heavy thud that made the silver spoons rattle against the wood. "The Dusty Rose is out," Eleanor announced, her face flushed. "Marcus says the dye lot is inconsistent this season. It's either the champagne or the sage. Beatrice, look at this sage. It's very organic." "Sage makes me look jaundiced, Mom," Beatrice said, not looking up. "You know green washes me out. Clara, doesn't green wash me out?" "You have warm undertones," Clara said, her voice mechanical. "The champagne would be better." "See?" Beatrice pointed a finger at Eleanor. "Clara agrees. Champagne. But it has to be the matte champagne, not the shiny polyester garbage they used for Aunt Sarah's 51st. Eleanor sighed, a theatrical, long-suffering sound, and slumped against the edge of the island. "Fine. Champagne it is. But that means we have to redesign the menu cards. The gold foil will clash with the champagne. Clara, you'll have to call the printer. Tell them we need the silver embossing instead." Clara stared at the heavy binder. The cover was smeared with a greasy thumbprint, likely from Eleanor's hand lotion. A clock ticked on the wall behind them, a slow, heavy clack, 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 that seemed to sync with the dull throbbing in Clara's womb. She reached for another spoon, her fingers cold, the skin around her cuticles raw from the polish. "The printer is closed on Mondays," Clara said. "Then call them first thing tomorrow," Eleanor said, already walking toward the coffee maker. She opened the cabinet, took out a mug, and paused, staring at the empty pot. "Clara, did you not start the coffee when you got here?" There was no anger in Eleanor's voice, only a mild, confused disappointment, as if a household appliance had failed to perform its basic function. Clara looked down at her hands, stained gray with silver polish. "No," she said, "I didn't." Eleanor clicked her tongue. "Well, could you? My head is absolutely splitting, and Marcus is calling back in 10 minutes. Clara did not move immediately. She watched a single drop of dirty silver polish run down her wrist, disappearing into the cuff of her gray sweater. The coffee maker began its slow, guttural cycle, the water heating with a high-pitched hiss before descending into a rhythmic, wet bubbling that echoed against the marble tiles. Clara stood by the counter, her palm pressed flat against the cool edge of the sink. The smell of dark roasted hazelnut rose into the air, thick and artificially sweet, clashing with the bitter metallic tang of the silver polish still drying on her fingertips. He wants 5 seats at the head table for his groomsmen, but that leaves absolutely no room for Aunt Clara, Beatrice sighed, her fingers pinching the bridge of her nose as she stared at her iPad. I mean, Julian is being incredibly stubborn about this. He knows she practically raised me after Dad left. Aunt Clara can go at table 4 with the country club crowd, Eleanor said without looking up from her swatch binder. She was flipping through pages of heavy linen samples, the thick paper scraping dryly against her thumbs. She'll be happier there anyway. She can gossip with the Miller twins. Clara, get the B-list RSVP cards from the dining room sideboard, will you? The ones with the blue ribbons. Clara did not move immediately. Her body felt heavy, as if she were wading through wet sand. The physical routine of moving from the sink to the coffee maker, then toward the dining room, required a conscious effort of breath. She counted the steps in her mind. 6 paces to the archway, 8 across the Persian rug, 4 to the mahogany sideboard. On the sideboard lay 3 neat stacks of cardstock, bound by thin satin ribbons. The cream-colored paper felt stiff and chalky against her skin. She picked them up, her thumb catching on the edge of a card marked Helen Vance. Helen was Julian's mother, a dry, meticulous woman who had already sent 3 separate emails regarding the menu's cross-contamination risks. Clara looked down at Helen's card. Written in elegant, slightly shaky cursive was the word celiac. In the master spreadsheet Clara had spent 3 weeks compiling before her trip to the clinic, she had color-coded every dietary restriction in bright yellow. But yesterday, while Clara was lying in the dark with a heating pad, Beatrice had taken over the master file to adjust the seating arrangements. Looking at the stack now, Clara noticed that the yellow sticker next to Helen's name had been peeled off. A quiet, cold calculation formed in the space behind Clara's eyes. To point out the missing sticker would require an explanation. It would mean explaining why the master file had been left incomplete, which would lead back to why Clara had missed the Sunday afternoon planning session. It would invite Beatrice's heavy, performative sigh, followed by Eleanor's soft, defensive murmur about how we all have to make sacrifices for the wedding, Clara. Instead, Clara slipped the stack into her hands, leaving Helen's card exactly as it was. If Helen was served the standard breaded chicken and spent the reception in the powder room, it would not be Clara's name on the email chain. The realization did not bring Clara satisfaction. It brought a strange, hollow lightness, like a burden being lifted 1 ounce at a time. She walked back into the kitchen, her sneakers squeaking softly on the oak floor. "Here they are," Clara said, placing the cards on the marble island next to Eleanor's elbow. Eleanor didn't look up, her hand reaching out automatically to slide the stack closer. Her fingers fumbled with the blue ribbon, tugging it loose with a quick, impatient jerk. "Thank God. Now, Beatrice, look at this. If we move the Millers to table 6, we can put Julian's college friends at table 12. That keeps them near the bar and away from the restrooms." "Table 12 is right next to the service doors, Mom," Beatrice protested, her voice rising an octave. "The waiters will be swinging those doors open every 30 seconds. It's loud, and it smells like garbage. Julian's friends are paying for their own flights from Chicago. We can't put them in the cheap seats." "Well, someone has to go there, Beatrice," Eleanor snapped, her phone buzzing on the counter. She glanced at the screen, her expression instantly shifting from irritation to a tight, professional smile as she swiped to answer. "Hello? Oh, Helen, yes, darling, we were just talking about you. Beatrice rolled her eyes, leaning back in her stool and scrolling through her phone. Yes, of course, Eleanor said into the phone, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. She gestured toward the coffee pot, waving a hand at Clara and pointing to a clean porcelain mug on the tree. We've got the menu completely sorted. Clara has been on top of every single detail. You know how meticulous she is. Gluten-free? Absolutely. We have a dedicated prep station at the caterer's kitchen. I'll have Clara send over the written confirmation from the chef this afternoon. Clara stood by the coffee maker, her fingers wrapped around the handle of the glass carafe. The heat radiated through the glass, warming her cold palms, but the warmth didn't penetrate the deep, hollow chill in her lower back. Eleanor's eyes locked onto Clara's, her eyebrows raised in a silent, commanding prompt. Get the mug. Pour the coffee. Clara picked up the mug. She poured the dark, steaming liquid, watching the bubbles pop against the rim. She didn't look at her mother. She didn't look at Beatrice. Clara, Eleanor whispered loudly, covering the phone's microphone with her palm. Did you hear me? Send Helen the confirmation. She's being absolutely manic about the gravy. I don't have the chef's email on my personal phone, Clara said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the usual apologetic cadence she used to smooth over these moments. Eleanor blinked, a momentary flicker of confusion crossing her face before her public persona snapped back into place. Helen? Sorry, a little static on the line. Yes, Clara is compiling the final kitchen notes as we speak. She'll have that to you by 4. Yes, sweetie. Bye-bye. Eleanor clicked her phone off and set it down with a sharp clack against the marble. She stared at Clara, her mouth slightly open. What do you mean you don't have the email? Eleanor asked, her tone dropping into the familiar, slightly strained register reserved for uncooperative staff. It's in the shared drive. Just log in and forward the PDF. It takes 2 seconds. The password was reset on Friday, Clara said. She set the mug of coffee down on the counter, 3 inches out of Eleanor's comfortable reach. I don't have the new login. Well, ask Beatrice for it, Eleanor said, reaching for the mug and frowning slightly when she had to lean forward to grasp it. Beatrice, give her the login. Beatrice didn't look up from her screen. I don't remember it. Julian set it up. Just text him, Clara. He's in a meeting, but he'll probably see it. Clara watched the steam rise from Eleanor's mug, curling into the bright, clinical light of the kitchen. She felt the physical sensation of her own heartbeat, slow, steady, and entirely separate from the frantic rhythm of the room. I'll text him later, Clara said. No, do it now, Clara, Eleanor insisted, taking a sip of the coffee and instantly grimacing. Ugh, this is practically lukewarm. Did you use the cold water from the tap again instead of the filtered? Clara did not answer. She reached for the silver polish and the cloth, her fingers sliding back into the gray, greasy residue left on the rag. The water in the sink was lukewarm, turning the congealed goat cheese on Beatrice's salad plate into a slick, grayish paste. Clara kept her hands submerged in the dishwater, her fingers tracing the smooth, heavy rim of the porcelain. A single drop of lemon vinaigrette had dried onto the delicate gold leaf border, and she worked her thumb over it, over and over, until the oil softened and dissolved under her skin. In the adjacent sunroom, the light was bright and unforgiving, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows to illuminate the dust motes dancing around Beatrice. Beatrice was standing on a low wooden footstool, her arms raised as Eleanor draped a 3-tier tulle veil over her head. The fabric hissed as it slid over Beatrice's shoulders. It's too bunchy at the crown, Mom, Beatrice said, her voice muffled by the layers of netting. I look like a Victorian ghost, or a lamp. It needs to be steamed, Beatrice. Don't be dramatic, Eleanor murmured, her mouth full of sewing pins. She spoke around the metal, her voice tight and wheezing. "Clara, bring the small steamer from the laundry room when you're done with those plates. And some distilled water. Don't use the tap water. It leaves those white mineral crusts on the silk." Clara didn't answer. She pulled her hands out of the soapy water, letting the suds pop and dissolve on her wrists. The hum of the dishwasher began, a low mechanical vibration that shook the floorboards beneath her sneakers. She dried her hands on a linen tea towel, her skin dry and chalky from the dish soap. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a short, sharp vibration that felt like a needle pressing into her hip. She pulled it out. A text from Julian. "Hey, Beatrice said you need the drive login? It's Beatrice Gala 28, lowercase b. Can you upload the seating chart ASAP? The rental company is threatening to release the round tables if we don't pay the deposit by 3. Clara looked at the clock above the refrigerator. It was 1:45 p.m. The deposit had been sitting on Eleanor's desk for 4 days. Clara had filled out the authorization form, printed it, and placed it directly on Eleanor's keyboard on Friday morning before she drove herself to the hospital. Eleanor had simply pushed it aside to make room for her laptop. Clara stared at Julian's text. She calculated the physical and emotional cost of logging into the shared drive, formatting the spreadsheet, converting it to a PDF, and emailing it to the rental manager. It would take 20 minutes of sitting at the computer, staring at the names of 300 guests who did not know she existed, while her lower abdomen continued to throb with a dull, persistent heat. If she did not do it, the round tables would be released. The rental company would call Eleanor. Eleanor would panic, Beatrice would scream, and they would spend the evening scrambling to find a replacement. It would be a disaster. But it would not be Clara's disaster. She slowly typed back. "I don't have my laptop with me. I'll look at it when I get home tonight." She hit send. "Clara!" Eleanor's voice rose from the sunroom, sharper now, the pins clinking against her teeth as she took them out. "Did you hear me about the steamer? And grab the lavender spray from the linen closet. The tulle smells like plastic." Clara walked into the sunroom. Her boots felt heavy on the Persian rug. She stood at the edge of the room, her hands tucked into the pockets of her oversized sweater, her fingers curling around the cold, hard edges of her phone. Beatrice was staring at her reflection in the gilded floor mirror, turning her head from side to side. The veil caught the light, casting a fine, grid-like shadow across her face. "Do you think my nose looks big with the blusher down?" Beatrice asked, her eyes locked on her own image. "Be honest, Clara, because Vivian said the blusher makes my face look round, and I cannot have round face in the high-angle shots." "Your face isn't round," Clara said. "You're just saying that to make me feel better," Beatrice muttered, her lower lip turning down in a practiced pout. "Mom, tell her. She's being dismissive." "Clara is just tired, sweetie," Eleanor said, her fingers busy smoothing the lace at Beatrice's shoulder. She didn't look at Clara. "She's been in one of her moods all day. You know how she gets when she doesn't get enough sleep. It's that little stomach bug she had over the weekend." Stomach bug. The word hung in the humid air of the sunroom, sweet with the scent of the dried eucalyptus Eleanor kept in the corner vases. Clara felt a small, sharp sensation in her chest, like a dry leaf snapping. She had told Eleanor, on the phone from the clinic parking lot, while the engine of her car was idling and the exhaust was filling her head with a dull ache. She had used the words miscarriage and hemorrhage. She had told her mother that the doctor said she was 6 weeks along and that there was nothing left to do but wait for her body to clear the rest. But to Eleanor, a miscarriage was an untidy thing. It was a medical detail that did not fit into the champagne and lace vocabulary of Beatrice's summer wedding. It was a stomach bug. It was a little virus. It was something that could be swept under the rug of Clara's general, quiet compliance. "I'm going to get the steamer," Clara said. "Thank you, sweetie," Eleanor said, her voice already drifting back to the lace. "And hurry, please. The coordinator is coming at 3, and I want the dress fully staged in the foyer before she gets here." Clara turned and walked down the long, narrow hallway toward the laundry room. The house was quiet here, away from the sunroom. The walls were lined with framed black and white photographs of Beatrice's graduation, Beatrice's engagement party, Eleanor's 51st birthday in Cabo. There were no photos of Clara. She had always been the one holding the camera, or the one standing just outside the frame to ensure the lighting was correct. In the laundry room, the air was warm and smelled of bleach and lavender fabric softener. Clara leaned against the washing machine, the cold metal vibrating slightly against her thigh. She closed her eyes. Her phone buzzed again. "Julian, what do you mean you don't have your laptop? You always have your laptop. Can't you just do it on your phone? The manager is calling me now." Clara looked at the message. She did not reply. She set the phone on the folding table, face down, next to a stack of Beatrice's monogrammed cocktail napkins. The gallon jug of distilled water was surprisingly heavy. Clara had to use both hands to lift it, her forearm muscles tensing as she tipped the clear liquid into the narrow mouth of the steamer's blue plastic tank. A few drops spilled over the side, pooling on the cold laminate of the laundry room folding table. She watched them sit there, tiny, perfect domes of tension, before she wiped them away with the edge of her sleeve. She plugged the steamer in. Within seconds, a low, wet gurgle began deep inside the plastic housing. The green indicator light started to blink, a rhythmic, mechanical pulse that cast a faint green glow on the white cabinet doors. On the table, her phone buzzed again. The screen lit up. Julian, 2. Then, the home phone in the hallway began to ring, a high, brassy chime that Eleanor had never changed because she liked the traditional feel of landlines. "Clara!" Eleanor's voice cut through the hum of the steamer from the front foyer. "Clara, get the landline, would you? I'm trying to get Beatrice out of this petticoat, and it's stuck in the zipper." Clara stood still, her hand resting on the cool plastic handle of the steamer. The steam was beginning to rise now, a thin, wispy plume that smelled faintly of old limescale and hot rubber. She looked at her cell phone. The screen had gone black again. It was 2:51 p.m. 9 minutes. If Julian didn't get the authorization form to the rental manager by 3 o'clock, the reserve on the 24 round tables would expire. The manager, a no-nonsense woman named Sandra, whom Clara had spent 3 hours placating last Tuesday, had been very clear. "We have 3 other weddings for that weekend, Clara. If the deposit isn't cleared by Monday at 3, the tables go to the next client. No exceptions." Clara had written that down in her leather-bound notebook. She had highlighted it in pink. She had shown it to Eleanor. Eleanor had said, Yes, of course, darling. Remind me on Monday morning." Clara had not reminded her. She picked up the steamer. The weight of it made her lower back ache, a sharp, pinch-like pain that radiated down her left thigh. She walked slowly out of the laundry room, carrying the steaming machine in front of her like a small shield. In the hallway, the landline was still ringing, its persistent double-tone chime bouncing off the high white walls. "Clara, for heaven's sake, answer that!" Eleanor shouted from the master bedroom at the end of the hall. "It's probably the florist about the altar arrangements." Clara walked past the ringing phone. She didn't look at it. She entered the foyer, where Beatrice's wedding gown hung from the central brass chandelier, encased in a massive, opaque white garment bag. The bag hung like a heavy shroud in the center of the room, casting a long, dark shadow across the polished limestone floor. The front doorbell rang, two clear, melodic chimes. "I've got it!" Eleanor called out, her voice suddenly sweet and breathless as she rushed down the stairs. Her hair was slightly damp from a touch-up, and she was smoothing down the front of her linen trousers. She didn't look at Clara as she passed her, but she did grab the steamer out of Clara's hand with a quick, practiced yank. "Thank you, sweetie. Go open the door." "It's Melissa," Eleanor whispered, her breath smelling faintly of peppermint and white wine. Clara stood in the center of the foyer, her hand still curved in the shape of the steamer handle she was no longer holding. She turned toward the front door and opened it. Melissa, the wedding coordinator, stood on the porch. She was a small, wire-thin woman in a tailored black blazer, holding a thick leather clipboard under her arm. Despite the 80-degree heat, she looked perfectly dry and crisp. "Hi, Clara," Melissa said, her professional smile vanishing for a fraction of a second as she scanned Clara's face. "Are you all right? You look a bit pale." "I'm fine," Clara said, stepping back to let her in. "Come in." "Melissa, thank God you're here!" Eleanor cried, abandoning the steamer on the limestone floor, where it continued to hiss and puff steam directly toward the bottom of the garment bag. Eleanor threw her arms around Melissa in a tight, performative hug. "We are in an absolute state of chaos. The boutique sent the wrong petticoat, and Marcus is being completely impossible about the champagne silk." "We'll handle it, Eleanor," Melissa said, her voice smooth and practiced, the tone of a woman who was paid $10,000 to prevent wealthy women from having strokes. She set her clipboard on the entry table, right next to the empty silver tray where the mail usually sat. "First things first. Julian called me 10 minutes ago. He said there's some issue with the table deposit. He was quite frantic." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand, laughing softly. "Oh, Julian is always panicking about the budget. He's so sweet that he doesn't understand how these things work. Clara handled the deposit on Friday." Melissa turned her eyes to Clara, her brow furrowing slightly. "Did you? Because Sandra from Premier Rentals texted me 5 minutes ago saying they haven't received the authorization form. She said she's releasing the inventory at 3. The grandfather clock in the corner of the foyer began to chime. 1, 2, 3. The heavy, deep tones vibrated through the limestone floor, rising up through the soles of Clara's sneakers. "Clara, sweetie, you sent that, didn't you?" Eleanor asked, her smile remaining fixed on her face, though her eyes narrowed slightly as she looked at her youngest daughter. "The paper was on my desk. I told you to take care of it." "The authorization required your signature, Mom," Clara said. Her voice was remarkably calm, almost conversational. "And your credit card details." "Well, yes, but you have my card memorized," Eleanor said, her laugh carrying a sharp, defensive edge now. She looked at Melissa as if appealing to a jury. "She always handles the billing. Clara, tell me you didn't let the tables go. We need those exact round tables for the tent layout. The square ones won't fit the floor plan." "I left the paper on your keyboard on Friday morning," Clara said. She did not raise her voice. She did not apologize. She simply stood next to the garment bag, watching the steam from the abandoned machine slowly begin to wilt the bottom edge of the white plastic casing. "I told you it needed to be signed and sent by today." "But I was at the boutique on Friday." Eleanor's voice lost its sweet, airy quality, dropping into a hard, flat rattle. "You knew I was busy. You should have reminded me this morning." "I was at the clinic this morning," Clara said. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only with the steady, wet hiss of the steamer. Eleanor stared at her. For a moment, a flicker of something like guilt, or perhaps just the sudden, uncomfortable realization of how her words sounded in front of the coordinator, passed over her face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the familiar, sharp exasperation of a woman whose convenience had been compromised. "Well," Eleanor said, her chin rising as she turned back to Melissa. "We'll just have to call Sandra and tell her there's been a mistake. She knows us. She'll hold them." "Sandra doesn't work that way, Eleanor," Melissa said softly, her eyes lingering on Clara with a strange, quiet intensity. "She has a waiting list. If she released them at 3, they're already gone." The shadows of the maple trees in the front yard had stretched long and thin across the kitchen floor, reaching the edge of the marble island by 5:45 p.m. The summer heat was beginning to break outside, but inside, the air conditioning hummed with a heavy, dry persistence that made the skin on Clara's face feel tight. In the study down the hall, the voices of Eleanor, Beatrice, and Melissa rose and fell in a frantic, irregular rhythm. "They only have the 8-foot banquet tables left, Beatrice." Eleanor's voice was strained, the artificial lightness from earlier completely gone. "If we use those, the seating chart is entirely ruined. We'll have to put people in long rows, like a buffet or a parish hall." "I am not having my wedding reception look like a soup kitchen, Mom." Beatrice's voice cracked, followed by the dry, rhythmic sound of her hands slapping against a wooden tabletop. "There has to be another rental place. What about the one in West Hampton? Melissa, call them." "I called them, Beatrice." Melissa's voice was calm, but there was a thin edge of exhaustion to it now. "They're fully booked for that weekend. It's peak season. Clara, do you have the number for the boutique rental firm in Shoreline? The one you used for the charity gala last spring?" Clara was standing by the kitchen island, her canvas tote bag open in front of her. She was carefully organizing her things. First, the leather-bound notebook, its edges slightly frayed from 3 years of holding the family's schedules, dentist appointments, and dry cleaning tickets. Next, her water bottle. Finally, her hand slid into the zippered side pocket, her fingers brushing against the folded, crisp sheet of the clinic discharge instructions. Patient should avoid prolonged standing and heavy lifting for 48 to 72 hours. "It's in the dark green folder in the filing cabinet," Clara called out. Her voice did not carry. It stayed in the kitchen, flat and level. "Which dark green folder?" Eleanor shouted back, her heels clicking rapidly toward the study door. "There are 3 folders in there, Clara. Just come and find it, please. We are in the middle of a crisis here." Clara did not move toward the study. She took her car keys from the counter. The metal ring made a sharp, clean sound as it hit her palm. "The tab is labeled Vendors, Miscellaneous," Clara said, her voice remaining at the exact same volume. A moment of silence followed, then the sound of drawer tracks sliding open with a heavy metallic rattle. "I don't see it," Eleanor called out, her tone rising in irritation. "It's not here. Clara, really, this is not the time to be difficult. Just come in here and look. Beatrice is hyperventilating." Clara looked down at her canvas bag. She zipped it closed. The sound of the plastic zipper teeth interlocking was loud in the empty kitchen. She calculated the energy it would take to walk into the study, open the cabinet, pull out the folder that she knew was exactly where she had said it was, and hand it to her mother. It would take less than 2 minutes. But then Eleanor would ask her to make the call. Beatrice would ask her to draft a new seating layout based on rectangular tables. Julian would text again about the deposit refund. They would keep her there until 9 o'clock, feeding her cold takeout pizza while she sat on the edge of the sofa, holding a hand over her lower abdomen to dull the persistent, hot ache. And when she finally left, they would say, "Thanks, sweetie, we'd be lost without you," and never once ask why she was leaning against the doorframe just to keep her balance. "It's in the second drawer," Clara said, her voice dropping even lower. "Near the back." "For God's sake, Clara," Beatrice groaned from the study, "just get it for us. Why are you being like this today? It's literally my wedding." Clara picked up her canvas bag and slung the strap over her shoulder. The weight of it pressed against her collarbone, a dull, familiar pressure. She walked out of the kitchen, but instead of turning left toward the study, she turned right toward the front door. The foyer was cool and dim. The steamer she had left earlier had been unplugged, but a small pool of condensed water still sat on the limestone floor, reflecting the pale light from the transom window above the door. "Clara?" Eleanor's voice came from the hallway, closer now. "Where are you going? Melissa needs those dimensions before she leaves." Clara stopped with her hand on the brass doorknob. The metal was cool against her palm. She didn't turn around to look at her mother. "I'm going home," Clara said. "Home?" Eleanor stopped at the edge of the foyer, her hands on her hips. Her face was flushed, a few strands of hair loose from her claw clip. "Now? We haven't even ordered dinner. I was going to have you pick up the Thai food from the place near your apartment." "I have some things I need to take care of," Clara said. "What things?" Eleanor's brow furrowed, her eyes scanning Clara's face with a mixture of annoyance and genuine, albeit shallow, confusion. "You said you just had a stomach bug. Surely you can stay another hour. We are literally drowning here with this table situation." "I can't," Clara said. She turned the doorknob. The latch clicked open, and a breath of warm evening air slipped into the air-conditioned foyer, carrying the scent of dry grass and asphalt. "Well, fine," Eleanor sighed, her shoulders dropping in a gesture of heavy, dramatic resignation. "But please have the updated seating chart emailed to Melissa by 9 tomorrow morning. And don't forget to call the printer about the champagne envelopes first thing. I don't want to have to remind you again." Clara did not say yes. She did not say no. She stepped out onto the stone porch, the door clicking shut behind her with a soft, heavy thud that seemed to echo in the quiet of the evening. She walked down the steps toward her car, her joints stiff, her shadow stretching long and thin ahead of her across the gravel driveway. Behind her, through the frosted glass of the front door, she could hear the faint, muffled sound of Beatrice's voice rising again, already complaining about the heat. The bathroom in Clara's apartment was small, illuminated by a single, humless overhead bulb that threw her shadow sharply against the pale blue tiles. In the quiet, the only sound was the slow, rhythmic drip of the shower head, dropping one heavy bead of water onto the porcelain tub every 4 seconds. Drop. Drop. Clara stood before the mirror, her hands resting on the edge of the sink. She had peeled off the gray sweater and her jeans, leaving them in a heap on the bath mat. In their place, she wore an oversized, faded cotton t-shirt that smelled faintly of the unscented detergent she always bought. She looked at her reflection. The dark circles under her eyes were more pronounced now, a deep plum against her pale skin, and her lips were dry, peeling slightly at the corners. She reached for the medicine cabinet, her knuckles scraping against the plastic edge. Inside sat a small amber bottle of prescription-strength ibuprofen the clinic doctor had handed her. She popped the child-proof cap, a sharp plastic click that felt loud in the small room, and shook 2 round orange pills into her palm. She swallowed them dry, her throat constricting around the chalky shape of the tablets. Her phone, sitting on the closed lid of the toilet, buzzed. It didn't ring. She had turned off the sound in the car, but the vibration against the hard plastic seat made a harsh, drilling noise that vibrated through the floorboards. The screen lit up. Beatrice. "Clara, seriously? Julian said you haven't answered his texts. We are trying to figure out if we need to pay the rush fee for the rectangular tables, or if Melissa can source the rounds from the secondary warehouse. We need the count by tonight. Please text him back." Clara watched the screen until it went dark. She walked into her kitchen, her bare feet pressing against the cool linoleum. Her apartment was 3 miles from Eleanor's house, but it felt like a different city. It was quiet. There were no half-empty wine glasses on the counters, no ringing landlines, no piles of silk swatches spilling off the table. There was only a single clean glass on the drying rack, a half-empty box of chamomile tea, and the small, dark silhouette of her kettle sitting on the stove. She did not turn on the stove. Instead, she poured a glass of cold water from the pitcher in the fridge. The condensation immediately bloomed on the glass, dampening her fingers. She sat at her small kitchen table, her phone resting next to the water glass. In her mind, Clara began a slow, deliberate tally of the morning. It was an internal ledger she had kept for years, but tonight the columns were different. Normally, the ledger was filled with deficits she had to fill. Mom's prescription needs pickup. Beatrice needs her shoes picked up from the cobbler. Julian needs the contract reviewed. Tonight, she looked at the list of tasks waiting for her tomorrow morning, measuring them not by how she would accomplish them, but by the weight of their absence. At 9 a.m., the printer would call. They would want the final approval on the silver-embossed menu cards. If Clara didn't reply, the print run would be pushed to Thursday. Thursday was too late for the standard shipping. They would have to pay a $400 overnight fee. At 10 a.m., Melissa would arrive at the florist to approve the altar mock-up. Melissa didn't have the floral contract. Clara had it on her personal email. If Clara didn't forward it, Melissa would have to guess the hydrangea counts or call Eleanor. Eleanor would not know the counts. At 11 a.m., Helen Vance would call Eleanor to ask about the gluten-free kitchen confirmation. Eleanor would have nothing to send her because Clara had not texted Julian for the Drive login. Helen would panic. She would call Beatrice. Beatrice would accuse Julian of not caring about her family's health. Clara took a slow sip of the water. The coldness throat tightened her, but it felt clean. She calculated the silence. If she replied to Beatrice now, the thread would continue. There would be more questions, more frantic demands masquerading as urgent requests, more polite insistence that she was the only one who could fix this. If she did not reply, they would assume she was asleep. They would be annoyed, but they would wait. The real shift would happen tomorrow. Her phone vibrated again, the screen casting a pale, bluish-white square of light onto the kitchen wall. Eleanor. Clara, I know you're not feeling well, but I've uploaded the print proofs to the Drive. Please look at the spacing on the invitations. Melissa says the margins look tight. Let me know when you've approved them so I can sleep. So I can sleep. Clara looked at the words. She remembered 3 nights ago, sitting on her own bathroom floor at 3 a.m., her knees tucked to her chest, watching a dark, thick stream of blood circle the drain. She had text-messaged Eleanor, "Mom, I'm bleeding. I think I'm losing the baby." Eleanor's response, sent 4 hours later at 7:12 a.m., had been, "Oh, sweetie, let me know what the doctor says. I'm heading to the Drapers now, but call me if it's an emergency." Clara had not called. She had driven herself to the clinic. She had sat in the waiting room alone, surrounded by the quiet hum of the water cooler and the soft rustle of old magazines. She picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't open the messages from Beatrice or Eleanor. Instead, she slid her finger to the top of the screen, pulled down the settings menu, and tapped the icon for Do Not Disturb. She set the schedule. From 10:15 p.m. to 12 p.m. tomorrow. The tiny crescent moon icon appeared at the top of the screen, silent and cold. She set the phone down on the table, face down. The black glass of the back of the phone reflected nothing but the dark ceiling. She stood up, walked back to her bedroom, and climbed into bed. The sheets were cool and smelled of nothing at all. She lay on her side, her knees tucked slightly toward her stomach, listening to the quiet hum of her own refrigerator through the open door. It was a small, steady sound, entirely her own. The shell of the hard-boiled egg gave way with a series of tiny, crisp snaps as Clara pressed her palm against it, rolling it slowly back and forth across the clean laminate of her countertop. She peeled it meticulously, her thumb slipping under the thin, grayish membrane beneath the shell to lift away the white fragments in large, clean curves. She dropped the pieces of shell into a small, empty yogurt container she used for compost. She sliced the egg in half. The yolk was perfectly yellow, just slightly soft in the very center. She sprinkled a pinch of coarse sea salt over it, watching the white crystals dissolve against the warm surface. She ate slowly, standing by the small kitchen window. The morning sun was bright, cutting a sharp yellow rectangle across the linoleum floor and illuminating the fine layer of dust on her toaster. Outside, a neighbor was loading a basket of wet laundry into the back of a hatchback, the car doors shutting with a dull, hollow thud. On her small dining table, her phone sat face up. Under the Do Not Disturb setting, the screen remained dark, but every few minutes, a brief, pale shimmer would rise from the glass, a silent notification of a call or message being routed directly to voicemail. It was 10:15 a.m. Normally, by this time on a Tuesday, Clara's day was already 4 hours deep into other people's crises. She would have driven to the gourmet market to pick up Eleanor's imported olive oils, taken Beatrice's dogs to the groomer, and spent 45 minutes on the phone with the caterer, arguing about the difference between a canapé and an hors d'oeuvre. Her own breakfast would have been a stale granola bar eaten in the car while waiting for a train crossing. Today, she finished her egg. She rinsed the plate in the sink, using her index finger to rub away a small smear of yolk from the porcelain. The water was hot, the steam rising to mist her face and the front of her hair. At 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes before her phone's silent mode was scheduled to turn off, Clara opened her laptop on the kitchen table. Her personal email inbox was already full. At 9:02 a.m., an automated message from Apex Printing House. Urgent, proof approval pending. Your order is currently on hold. If approval is not received by 10 a.m. today, your delivery date will be moved from Friday to next Wednesday. Please log in to approve the proofs. At 10:12 a.m., an email from Melissa, the wedding coordinator. Clara, I'm at the floral showroom with the designer. We don't have the contract copy with the specific rose varieties you finalized last month. The florist is refusing to start the altar mock-up without it because of the substitution clauses. Eleanor says you have the copy on your laptop. Please forward immediately. We are on a tight schedule. At 10:45 a.m., an email from Beatrice. Clara, where are you? Why aren't you answering your phone? Mom is literally in tears. The printer called her saying the invitations are delayed by a week unless we pay a $500 rush fee, and they can't even guarantee Friday delivery now. This is completely ruining the mailing schedule. You knew the deadline was 10. What is going on? Clara read the emails. Her face remained expressionless, the pale blue light of the screen reflecting in her pupils. She did not open the printing house website. She did not draft a reply to Melissa. Instead, she sat back in her chair and took a sip of her lukewarm water. She did some mental math. The $500 rush fee was roughly equivalent to what Eleanor spent on her weekly facial treatments and hair blowouts. It was not a financial hardship. It was an annoyance. It was a crack in the smooth, polished surface of Eleanor's perfect control. If Clara stepped in now, if she called the printer, apologized, explained she had been under the weather, and begged them to waive the fee, they might do it. She had a good relationship with the manager there, but to do so would require an outlay of emotional currency Clara no longer possessed. It would require her to perform the role of the apologetic, scrambling assistant who had made a mistake. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of her turned-off phone. No, she thought. She opened her freelance design client folder on her laptop. She had 2 layout drafts due for a local boutique hotel by Friday, work that actually paid her rent, work she had been forcing into the midnight hours between her family's endless wedding errands. She opened the design software, the bright color palettes of the hotel brochures filling her screen. As the clock ticked to 12 p.m., she heard her phone make a low, soft chime. The Do Not Disturb period had ended. Almost instantly, the screen began to jump with a flurry of delayed notifications. 4 missed calls from Eleanor, 3 missed calls from Beatrice, 2 missed calls from Julian, 5 text messages. Clara did not pick up the phone. She watched the screen vibrate against the wood of the table, sliding a millimeter to the left with each buzz. When it finally went quiet, she reached out, turned the phone completely off, and placed it inside her desk drawer, sliding the heavy pine drawer shut until it clicked. The silence returned to the kitchen, thick and heavy and clean. She placed her fingers on the keyboard of her laptop and began to work. The design software was silent, its interface a grid of dark gray and cool violet. Clara clicked her mouse, dragging a text box 2 pixels to the left, then 2 pixels to the right, aligning it perfectly with the invisible margin of the hotel brochure. She locked the layer. Click. She liked this kind of work. It was quiet, predictable, and obeyed rules. If a margin was off, a simple calculation corrected it. There were no emotional negotiations, no sudden shifts in tone, no expectations of invisible labor. A sudden, heavy knock rattled the cheap hollow core wood of her apartment door. Thud, thud, thud. Clara's hand remained steady on the mouse. She didn't jump. She waited, her eyes still on the screen, as the silence of the room swallowed the vibration. A second later, the knock came again, faster and more impatient. "Clara, it's Julian. Open up!" Clara sat still for 5 seconds, her chest rising and falling in a slow, measured breath. She looked at her desk drawer, where her phone lay dark and silent. Julian had never been to her apartment alone. He had only been here twice before, always with Beatrice, always staying for less than 10 minutes because the parking was difficult and the neighborhood lacked character. She calculated the physical energy required to ignore him. If she remained silent, he might stand there for 10 minutes, his knocks growing louder, attracting the attention of her elderly neighbor. He might call Eleanor, who would then call the building manager. Opening the door would end the noise immediately. She could manage the interaction if she kept it short, cold, and confined to the threshold. She stood up, her lower abdomen giving a small, sharp pinch as she straightened her spine. She walked down her short hallway, her bare feet silent on the wood, and slid back the brass deadbolt. The lock gave a heavy, dry clack. She opened the door 6 inches, her body blocking the gap. Julian stood in the dim, carpeted hallway of her building. He had taken off his suit jacket, which was draped over his forearm, and his blue silk tie was loosened at the collar. His forehead was slick with sweat, his blonde hair slightly disheveled. He smelled of high-end citrus cologne and the stale air of a car interior. "Thank God," Julian said, his hand immediately reaching out to push the door wider. Clara did not move her shoulder. She kept her weight firmly against the wood, holding the 6-inch gap. Julian's hand hovered in the air for a second before dropping back to his side, his smile faltering. "Your phone is off," he said, his tone carrying a light, nervous chuckle that was meant to be casual but sounded tight. "Beatrice is having a literal meltdown, Clara. The printer charged us a $500 rush fee because the approvals didn't go through, and Sandra from the rental place won't even take our calls now. She redirected us to some automated customer service line." "I know," Clara said. Julian blinked, his head tilting slightly as he tried to read her face. "You know? Then why aren't you answering? I texted you the Drive login yesterday. All we need you to do is jump on, pull up the backup vendor list, and forward it to Melissa. It takes 5 minutes." "I don't have my phone on," Clara said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the apologetic pitch Julian was accustomed to hearing whenever he asked for a favor. "Well, can you turn it on?" Julian's voice rose slightly, the diplomatic veneer beginning to crack. He shifted his weight, his leather dress shoes squeaking on the hallway carpet. "Look, Clara, I get that you're under the weather. Beatrice told me you had a stomach bug or something, but this is getting a bit ridiculous. It's a Tuesday afternoon. We're losing thousands of dollars in deposits because of a simple communication mix-up." A simple communication mix-up. Clara looked at the small silver tie clip Julian wore. It was shaped like a tiny golf club, a gift from Beatrice for their 3rd anniversary. "My phone is off because I am working," Clara said. "We're all working, Clara," Julian said, his tone dropping into a patronizing smoothness. "I left a client meeting early to drive over here because Beatrice was hyperventilating on the kitchen floor. Eleanor is completely overwhelmed. They don't know where the contracts are. They don't have the login details. You've always handled these things." "The folder is in the 2nd drawer of the filing cabinet," Clara said. "I told Eleanor that yesterday before I left." "Well, she looked and she couldn't find it," Julian said, his hand rising to rub the back of his neck. "Look, just let me come in. We can log onto your computer, get the files, and I'll be out of your hair. I'll even buy you dinner, whatever you want." The offer was made with the easy, transactional confidence of a man who believed every problem had a price and every person had a button. He was using his polite voice, the one he used with caterers and parking valets, to get what he wanted without having to say please. Clara looked at his hand, still hovering near the doorframe. "No," she said. Julian froze. His mouth opened slightly, a small, genuine look of shock crossing his features. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I am not giving you the files, Julian, and I am not logging onto the drive," Clara said. She felt her heartbeat, slow, heavy, cool. "The password you sent me was incorrect anyway." "I sent you Beatrice Gala 28 with a lowercase b," Julian said, his voice rising, his cheeks flushing pink. "I know it's correct. I set it up myself." "It's incorrect," Clara said, though she had never actually tried it. "And I don't have the energy to troubleshoot it for you. I have my own work to finish." "Clara, this is Beatrice's wedding," Julian said, his eyes narrowing, his polite demeanor completely dissolving into a hard, demanding glare. "She's your sister. How can you be this selfish over a stomach bug? We've been incredibly patient with you, but this is crossing a line. You're intentionally letting things fall apart." Clara looked at him for 3 long seconds. She did not defend herself. She did not tell him about the clinic, or the bleeding, or the empty cradle of her own body. She did not explain that her stomach bug had a discharge paper and a grief that felt like stone in her chest. She simply pulled the door back an inch. "I have to get back to my layout," Clara said softly. Before Julian could speak, she closed the door. The latch clicked into place, and she slid the heavy brass deadbolt back with a sharp, final clack. Through the wood, she heard Julian's breath catch, followed by a muffled, angry curse. His footsteps retreated down the hallway, heavy and rapid, the elevator doors down the hall opening with a distant, mechanical chime before the building fell silent once more. The laundry basket was a warm, white plastic shell resting on Clara's bed, filled with clean, soft cotton that smelled faintly of unscented detergent and hot air. She reached in, her fingers sinking into the warmth of her bath towels. She pulled one out, shook it once to release the static cling, and began to fold it. She folded it in half, then into thirds, smoothing her palm over the terry cloth to press out any wrinkles, before placing it in a neat stack on her comforter. Outside, the sky had turned a deep, dusty indigo, the last orange ribbons of the June sunset fading behind the brick apartment complex across the street. The streetlights flickered on, casting a pale yellow grid pattern through her bedroom blinds. Clara picked up her phone from the dresser. It was 6:45 p.m. She had turned it back on after Julian left, but she had kept the notifications muted. Now, she unlocked the screen and tapped the icon for the family group chat. The chat was titled, "The Road to I Do." Normally, the chat was a continuous stream of images, screenshots of bridesmaid dresses, links to registry items, and long, manic paragraphs from Beatrice about the cake tasting. Clara's role in the chat had always been that of the silent stabilizer. She was the one who liked every photo, sent encouraging emojis, and chimed in with logistical solutions whenever Eleanor and Beatrice began to bicker over budget details. Tonight, the scroll of messages was a dense wall of black and white text, punctuated by exclamation points and frantic capital letters. Beatrice, 4:12 p.m. Julian said Clara literally shut the door in his face. He drove all the way out there to get the login, and she wouldn't even let him in. What is actually wrong with her? Since when is she this selfish? Eleanor, 4:18 p.m. I had to pay the $500 rush fee to the printer. They said the order was put on hold because the final approval was 3 hours late. Clara, if you are reading this, we will need to discuss how this is being handled. That money was budgeted for the welcome bags. Beatrice, 4:45 p.m. And now Melissa says the floral mock-up is off for tomorrow because the designer doesn't have the roses we wanted. Mom, did you lose the contract? You said you filed it. Eleanor, 4:50 p.m. I did not lose it, Beatrice. I told you, Clara had all the floral documents on her laptop. If she had just forwarded the email to Melissa this morning like I asked, none of this would have happened. I am doing the best I can here. Beatrice, 4:52 p.m. Well, your best is letting my wedding get ruined. Julian's mother is already asking why she hasn't received the kitchen confirmation. She thinks we're ignoring her. This is so humiliating. Julian, 5:15 p.m. Let's all take a breath. I can try calling the florist tomorrow morning to see if they can squeeze us back in. Beatrice, 5:18 p.m. No, Julian, they have a huge event in Newport tomorrow. They told Melissa today was our only window for the mock-up. Now we're going into the final month completely blind on the centerpieces. Clara slowly scrolled through the messages, her thumb dragging the screen upward. The conversation was starting to turn inward, the lack of a central mediator causing the friction between Eleanor and Beatrice to heat up. Without Clara there to say, "Don't worry, I have the floral contract PDF on my phone, I'll send it now," or, "I'll call the printer and see if I can get them to waive the fee," they had no choice but to face the consequences of their own disorganized demands. And because they couldn't reach Clara, They were beginning to blame each other. Clara calculated the weight of her silence. If she typed a response now, even a simple one like, "I was resting. The contract is in your email inbox from 3 weeks ago if you search floral mock-up," she would be pulled back into the current. They would see it as an opening. They would call her immediately, their voices tight with artificial sweetness, saying, "Oh, thank God, sweetie, we were so worried. Now, about the seating chart." She did not type. She closed the app and set the phone face down on her nightstand. She reached back into the laundry basket, pulling out a gray cotton t-shirt. She folded the sleeves inward, then folded the hem up to the collar, creating a neat, compact square. She felt a mild, empty sensation in her chest, like looking at an old photograph of a place she no longer lived. For years, she had believed that her labor was what kept the family together. She had believed that if she stopped, the world would end. But the world wasn't ending. The sun had set, the streetlights were on, and her laundry was warm. The only thing that was ending was her willingness to be the cushion they threw themselves against whenever they fell. She walked over to her closet, carrying the stack of folded towels. As she opened the door, her phone vibrated on the nightstand, a single long buzz that indicated a direct text message, not a group chat notification. She walked back and picked it up. It was from Eleanor. "Eleanor, Clara, please. Beatrice is hysterical and won't leave her room. I know you're upset about whatever is going on with you, but we are a family. We help each other. Just send Melissa the floral file. That's all we're asking. Let's not let a little stomach bug ruin your sister's special year." A little stomach bug. Clara looked at the words. She felt the heavy, dry weight of her own breath in her throat. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the clean white light of the clinic's recovery room, the quiet murmur of the nurses, and the cold cup of apple juice they had given her before they let her leave. Her mother had not been there. Her sister had not been there. She opened her eyes. She did not reply to Eleanor's text. She took the stack of towels, placed them neatly on the top shelf of her closet, and shut the door, letting the darkness of the closet swallow the soft, clean cotton. The loose green tea leaves swirled in the hot water, slowly unfurling from tight, dark gray curls into wide, pale green ribbons. Clara watched them drift to the bottom of the glass teapot, turning the water a soft, translucent jade. She poured the tea through a small bamboo strainer into her favorite heavy ceramic mug, the heat immediately radiating through the clay to warm her palms. It was 8:15 a.m. on Wednesday. The morning air coming through her open kitchen window was cool, carrying the sharp, damp smell of wet asphalt from a street sweeper that had passed by earlier. Clara took a slow sip of the tea, its bitter, grassy flavor clean on her tongue, and sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop. The screen glowed in the quiet room, casting a soft light across her wooden table. For the past 5 years, Clara had been the administrative skeleton of the family. She was the one who kept track of the passwords, the renewal dates, the insurance policies, and the shared digital accounts. It had started simply enough when she was in college, helping Eleanor set up her first iPad, organizing Beatrice's college graduation photos. But over time, her invisible labor had quietly hardened into an expectation. She had become the unpaid curator of their digital lives. Today, she began the process of untangling. She logged into her personal bank portal. First, she opened her credit card statement, scrolling past her own modest utility bills to find the recurring charges. There it was, Google Cloud Storage, $9.99. This was the shared drive that held everything. Every document related to Beatrice's wedding, the vendor contracts, the high-resolution engagement photos, the master guest list, the seating charts, the catering invoices, was stored in that drive. It also held Eleanor's personal tax documents from the last 3 years and the photos of Beatrice's bachelorette party in Cabo. The drive had exceeded its free 15-gigabyte limit 2 years ago, and Clara had quietly linked her own card to keep the system running. Clara clicked on the billing settings. She selected Update Payment Method. She did not delete the billing info entirely. That would trigger an immediate red flag notification to Eleanor's email. Instead, she took an old, empty Visa gift card from her desk drawer, one with a remaining balance of 42 cents, and entered the details, replacing her active credit card. She clicked Save. A small green banner appeared at the top of the screen. Payment method updated successfully. Within 7 days, when the monthly billing cycle attempted to draft the $10, the card would decline. The drive would automatically revert to the free tier. Because they had over 80 gigabytes of files stored, the account would instantly freeze. No one would be able to upload new files, edit the existing spreadsheets, or download the contracts. To unfreeze it, Eleanor or Beatrice would have to log in and enter a valid card. But neither of them knew the login credentials. Clara had always kept them saved on her own password manager. Next, Clara logged into her mobile carrier account. For 6 years, she, Beatrice, and Eleanor had been on a shared family plan. The bill was draft debited from Clara's account every month, and Eleanor was supposed to write her a check for her and Beatrice's portions. Eleanor currently owed Clara $840 in unpaid phone bills from the last 7 months, a debt Clara had never pressed, because the resulting sigh and eye roll from Eleanor were always more expensive than the cash. Clara clicked Transfer of Billing Responsibility. She checked the boxes next to Eleanor and Beatrice's phone numbers. She clicked Request Split. The system generated an automated email that would be sent to Eleanor's inbox, informing her that she had 48 hours to accept financial responsibility for her own line and Beatrice's, or their service would be temporarily suspended. Clara clicked Submit. She closed the browser tab. She felt no rush of adrenaline, no heat in her chest. It was a cold, clean calculation. She was simply reclaiming her resources, withdrawing the invisible scaffolding she had built around them, and letting the structure settle onto its own weak foundations. She opened her email client to check her work inbox. There was a message from Julian, sent at 7:14 a.m. Clara, the email read, I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I was incredibly stressed when I came to your apartment, and I shouldn't have raised my voice. We are all under a lot of pressure right now. Beatrice didn't sleep at all last night, and she's genuinely making herself sick over this floral mock-up delay. Please, can we just put this behind us? Just send the florist contract to Melissa so we can get this sorted. Let me know what I can do to make this right. Julian. Clara read the email twice. It was a classic Julian communication. Polite, reasonable on the surface, but entirely transactional. He wasn't apologizing because he felt guilty. He was apologizing because his current living situation with a hysterical Beatrice was intolerable, and he wanted Clara to fix it so he could have his quiet evenings back. He wanted to buy his way back into her good graces with a clean, low-cost email. Let me know what I can do to make this right. Clara looked at her ceramic mug, the tea now lukewarm. She did not reply to Julian. She clicked the small folder icon at the top of her screen and moved the email directly into her archive folder, where it vanished between a newsletter and a receipt for printer paper. She looked out the window. The neighbor's cat was sitting on the wooden fence, its eyes closed, soaking in the pale, quiet morning sun. Clara took another sip of her tea, picked up her design stylus, and began to work on her hotel layout, the silence of her apartment deep and unbroken. The peel of the tangerine yielded to Clara's thumb with a soft, tearing sound, releasing a sudden, sharp mist of citrus oil into the air. The bright, acidic scent bloomed in the small kitchen, masking the faint smell of the wood polish she had used on the table earlier. She worked her fingers under the thick, dimpled skin, lifting it away in jagged, orange spirals. A tiny drop of sour juice stung a small cut on her knuckle, but she didn't wince. She simply wiped it against a paper towel and began pulling away the white, web-like pith from the fruit segments. It was 2:45 p.m. on Wednesday. Clara sat at her desk, the computer screen reflecting in the glass of her water mug. The tinny, compressed sound of standard bank hold music, a repetitive, digitized acoustic guitar loop, played through her laptop speakers. She had been on hold with the credit card company for 11 minutes. While she waited, she opened a separate tab to access her primary bank portal. When she was 19, Eleanor had insisted on setting up a joint savings account at a regional bank. At the time, Eleanor had framed it as an act of maternal protection. "Just in case of emergencies, sweetie. If your car breaks down, I can transfer funds instantly." Over the next 7 years, Clara had kept her freelance savings there. But the account had never been a one-way street. Eleanor frequently borrowed from it to cover shortfalls for family events. Beatrice's graduation brunch, a deposit for a weekend cabin rental, a caterer's tip, always accompanied by a casual text. "Took $400 for the dinner deposit, sweetie. We'll transfer it back on Friday when your father's check clears." The checks rarely cleared into Clara's account. Currently, the balance sat at $4,112. Of that, exactly $3,850 was Clara's hard-earned freelance design income. The remaining $262 belonged to Eleanor. Clara clicked Transfer Funds. She selected the joint savings account as the source. She selected her new individual checking account at an online-only bank, one Eleanor didn't even know existed, as the destination. She typed in the amount, $3,850. She clicked Confirm. The screen blinked and a small green checkmark appeared. The transaction would take 24 hours to clear. By tomorrow afternoon, the joint account would hold exactly $262. If Eleanor tried to pull money from it to cover her next wedding emergency, the transaction would decline. "Thank you for holding," a voice cut through the digitized guitar loop, clear and professional. "My name is Sarah. How can I help you today?" "Hi," Clara said, her voice steady and quiet. "I need to remove myself as an authorized user from an account, and I want to cancel the secondary card associated with my name." "Certainly. Can I have the primary account holder's name and the card number, please?" Clara read the digits from the black plastic card she had kept tucked behind her driver's license for 3 years. It was Eleanor's high-limit credit card, given to Clara so she could run family errands without needing reimbursement. Clara had never used it for herself. Every charge had been for Eleanor's groceries, Beatrice's dry cleaning, or bulk orders of wedding favor boxes from online wholesalers. "The primary is Eleanor Vance," Clara said. "And your relationship to the primary?" "I'm her daughter." "Perfect. I verified the security details. I see your card ending in 4982. I am officially removing you as an authorized user and deactivating that card. Please destroy the physical card. The change is immediate." "Thank you," Clara said. She hung up. She took a pair of heavy kitchen shears from the drawer, aligned the blades across the metallic chip of the black card, and squeezed. The plastic resisted for a second before snapping with a sharp, clean crack. She cut the card into 4 neat pieces and dropped them into the wastebasket. An email notification popped up in the corner of her screen. From Eleanor Vance, 2:38 p.m. Subject: Urgent. Phone service? Clara, the email read, I just received a very bizarre automated alert from the mobile provider saying my line is being detached from the family plan and that I have 48 hours to set up a new billing profile or my service will be suspended. Beatrice got the same message. Did you forget to pay the bill? Or is there some glitch with your card? Please call the carrier and fix this immediately. I am waiting on the final contract from the tent rental company, and I absolutely cannot have my phone cut off right now. Let me know when it's resolved. Clara slowly peeled a segment of the tangerine. The fruit was cold and sweet, the juice sharp on her tongue. She read the email again. Eleanor's immediate reaction was not to ask if Clara had changed the plan, but to assume Clara had failed. It was the natural, comfortable assumption of a woman who viewed Clara's management of their lives as a utility, like water or electricity. When the tap ran dry, you didn't ask if the reservoir was tired, you complained that the plumber was incompetent. Clara calculated the time. The carrier's 48-hour grace period had started at 8 a.m. today. It would expire on Friday morning at 8. If Eleanor did not log in, create a separate account, and link her own credit card by Friday, both her phone and Beatrice's would go dark. They would have no cellular data, no incoming calls, and no text messages. They would be cut off from their coordinator, their florist, and their guests, right at the start of the busiest weekend of the planning process. Clara did not reply to the email. She clicked the checkbox next to Eleanor's name, moved her mouse to the top menu, and clicked Archive. The email vanished from her screen, leaving only her clean, organized work inbox. Clara picked up another segment of the tangerine, her fingers smelling of bitter orange oil, and stared at the quiet street below her window. The water from the small copper watering can flowed in a thin, glittering stream, soaking into the dry, dark soil of the pothos on Clara's windowsill. She watched the water pool on the surface for a second before the earth drank it down, releasing a faint, metallic smell of wet dirt. Clara pressed her index finger into the soil, checking the moisture level. It was damp, cool, and firm. She pinched off a dry, yellowed leaf from the stem, the dead tissue crumbling to dust between her fingertips with a soft, papery rustle. It was Thursday morning, 8:30 a.m. The morning was gray and quiet, the sky covered in a thick, seamless layer of clouds that muted the light coming through her kitchen window. The world outside looked damp, though it hadn't rained yet. Clara set the watering can down and sat at her kitchen table, opening her laptop. She logged into her banking app. The screen blinked, displaying her account summaries. Private checking, $3,850, pending/cleared. The transfer from the joint savings account had officially cleared. The money was now entirely out of Eleanor's reach, tucked safely behind a two-factor security wall that only Clara could access. She clicked over to view the joint account. Joint savings, $262. Clara stared at the number. It was exactly what remained of Eleanor's portion. She scrolled down to the pending transactions section. Today was Thursday. According to the master wedding calendar Clara had kept on her desk for months, today was the day the florist, Petals and Vine, was scheduled to run the automated draft for the floral centerpieces deposit. The deposit was exactly $500. Eleanor had insisted on using the joint savings account for the florist's billing profile. She had told Clara 3 weeks ago, "We'll just keep the floral funds in there, sweetie. It's easier to keep track of if it's separate from my main household account." But Eleanor had never transferred her share of the floral deposit into the account. She had assumed, as she always did, that the account was a deep, self-replenishing well of Clara's personal savings that she could draw from now and square up later after the wedding was over. At 9:15 a.m., the bank's automated processing system would attempt to draft the $500 from the joint account. With only $262 available, the transaction would decline. Under the terms of the regional bank, a declined pre-authorized draft carried a $35 non-sufficient funds fee, which would immediately drop the account balance to $227. Furthermore, Petals and Vine had a notorious contract clause. If a deposit payment failed on the scheduled date, the reservation was immediately canceled, and the client was placed at the bottom of the waiting list for peak wedding season. Clara took a sip of her warm water. She calculated the steps it would take to prevent this. She could transfer $300 back into the joint account. She could call Eleanor and warn her. She could call the florist and offer her personal credit card. But to do any of those things would require her to resume her role as the quiet stabilizer, the safety net that caught them every time they leaped without looking. She chose to do nothing. She closed the banking tab. At 9:30 a.m., her phone vibrated on the table. It was a text message from Julian. "Julian, Clara, sorry to text you again, but Melissa is trying to reach you. She says Petals and Vine sent an automated alert saying the floral deposit draft failed this morning. Eleanor says she didn't get any email, and she's sure there's plenty of money in the account. Do you know if there's a hold on the card? Beatrice is losing her mind because the florist is threatening to release our date to another bride." Clara looked at the message. She could see the scene unfolding at Eleanor's house, Beatrice pacing the marble kitchen floor, her voice high and ragged. Eleanor, sitting at her desk, frantically clicking through her email inbox, accusing the florist of a system glitch. Julian, standing near the door, holding his keys, caught in the middle of a storm he had no idea how to navigate. They were so accustomed to Clara resolving these errors in the background that they hadn't even considered the possibility that the money simply wasn't there. They assumed it was a glitch. They assumed it was a hold. They assumed anything other than the truth, that the tap had run dry because the person who filled it had walked away. Clara typed a short reply. "Clara, I don't manage the banking profiles anymore. Eleanor will need to call the bank directly." She hit send. She then tapped the settings menu on her phone, selected Julian's contact profile, and tapped mute. She did the same for Beatrice and Eleanor. She did not block them. A block was too loud, too dramatic. It would invite a frantic confrontation. A muted thread was silent. It allowed the messages to pile up in a quiet, dark corner of her phone where they could do no harm to her morning. She picked up her stylus, opened her design layout for the boutique hotel, and began to work. The only sound in her apartment was the soft, rhythmic click of the stylus against the glass screen, a clean, predictable rhythm that belonged to her alone. The serrated bread knife sawed through the thick, charred crust of the sourdough loaf with a dry, crunching drag. Clara kept her hands steady on the rounded top of the bread, her fingers dusted with white flour. The blade bit into the soft, aerated interior, slicing off a single, clean piece about an inch thick. She set the knife down on the wooden cutting board, the blade catching a dull glint of afternoon light from the window. She spread a thin layer of cold, salted butter across the warm surface of the bread, watching the yellow fat slowly soften and sink into the pockets of the crumb. The scent of sour yeast and salt rose from the board, simple and clean. It was 1:15 p.m. on Thursday. Clara took her plate to her desk and sat down. As she reached for her water glass, her laptop screen flickered with an email notification from her bank's automated alert system. Notification: a pre-authorized debit of $500 from Petals and Vine was returned unpaid due to non-sufficient funds on account, ending in 8821. A fee of $35 has been assessed. Clara chewed her bread slowly. She didn't blink. She had expected the email at 9, but the clearinghouse took a few hours to process declined drafts. 2 minutes later, another notification appeared. This one was a transcription of a voicemail left on her phone. Because her phone was muted, the digital assistant had converted the audio into text and routed it to her email. From Eleanor Vance, 1:18 p.m. Transcription: Clara, what did you do? I just logged into the account to see why the florist declined, and the bank says there is only $227 in there. Where is the $3,800? Where is your savings? Clara, did you move it? Call me right now. This is... I don't even know what this is. You can't just take money out of a joint account like this. This is a crime, Clara. Call me immediately. Beatrice is in a state. Clara looked at the word crime in the pixelated text. A quiet, cold amusement touched the edge of her thoughts. Eleanor had always lived in a reality where what was Clara's belonged to the family, but what was the family's belonged to Eleanor. To Eleanor, Clara's savings were not personal property. They were a collective reserve, a buffer to absorb their bad planning and high expenses. Reclaiming her own money was, in Eleanor's eyes, a theft from the collective. Clara did not panic. Her hand did not shake as she set her bread down. This was the silent preparation. She had anticipated this exact reaction, and she had already laid the defensive groundwork. She opened her bank portal again. She went to the document archive and downloaded the PDF statements for the joint account spanning the last 3 years. Once the files were saved on her desktop, she opened her document editor. Methodically, using a bright yellow digital highlighter, she began to mark every single deposit that had originated from her business entity, Clara Vance Design, LLC. May 14th. Transfer from Clara Vance Design, LLC, $1,200. June 2nd. Transfer from Clara Vance Design, LLC, $850. July 11th. Transfer from Clara Vance Design, LLC, $1,500. She went page by page, highlighting her deposits in yellow. Then she selected a pale red highlighter and marked every single withdrawal Eleanor had made over the same period. June 15th. Withdrawal ATM, $400. June 20th. Transfer to Eleanor Vance Checking, $350. July 18th. POS Debit, Gourmet Market, $182.40. The ledger was clear, undeniable. When she was finished, she ran the totals in her spreadsheet. Over 3 years, Clara had deposited $14,200 of her own money into the account. Eleanor had deposited exactly $1,100, but had withdrawn $11,350 to cover her own personal and wedding-related expenses. The $3,850 Clara had transferred yesterday was the exact remainder of her own documented earnings. Eleanor's remaining $227 was actually more than Eleanor was legally owed based on the net balance of her deposits and withdrawals. Clara saved the highlighted PDFs and the spreadsheet into an encrypted folder on her local hard drive. She named the folder Financial_Defense. If Eleanor tried to make a scene, if she tried to involve Julian or threaten legal action, as she so loved to do when she felt slighted, Clara would simply send the file. She would not argue. She would not explain her feelings. She would present the ledger. She took another bite of her sourdough bread. The butter had fully melted now, leaving the bread rich and heavy. Her phone, still muted in the desk drawer, began to vibrate again. Through the wood, the low, rhythmic buzzing sounded like a trapped insect. Bzz, bzz, bzz. It would be Eleanor, or perhaps Beatrice, using Eleanor's phone, or Julian calling from his office. They would be calling in a panic, their voices sharp and demanding, expecting her to apologize, to return the money, to fix the florist issue. But Clara's phone was a one-way street now. She had closed the gate. She turned her eyes back to her hotel brochure design, adjusting the color balance of a pool photo to make the water look a deep, quiet blue. The sun began to break through the gray clouds outside, casting a long, sharp beam of white light across her clean kitchen floor, warming the wood. The cold metal of the mailbox key turned in the lock with a stiff, heavy click. Clara pulled open the small, gray metal door, reaching into the narrow cubby to retrieve a thin stack of envelopes. She carried them up the stairs to her apartment, the soles of her shoes tapping a soft, rhythmic beat against the linoleum treads of the stairwell. Sitting at her kitchen table, she sorted through the mail. It was a simple, grounding routine. She placed the utility bills on the left, a local grocery flyer in the middle, and a postcard from the city library on the right. She picked up a heavy, white envelope from her health insurance provider, sliding a slender brass letter opener beneath the sealed flap. The paper parted with a clean, sharp rip, revealing a standard, multi-page statement of benefits. It was Thursday evening, 5:45 p.m. The light in her kitchen was changing, turning a deep, syrupy amber as the sun sank below the roofline of the brick apartments across the street. The quiet of her home was absolute, save for the occasional distant rumble of a car engine on the road below. Clara set the paper down and opened her laptop to check her email. In her inbox sat an automated notification from her mobile service provider. Urgent notice. Billing transfer pending. You have 14 hours remaining to complete the transfer of billing responsibility for lines ending in -4401 and -4402. If the receiving parties do not accept the transfer and establish their own billing profiles by Friday at 8 a.m., these lines will be automatically deactivated from your group account and service will be suspended. Clara stared at the screen, her face illuminated by the pale blue glow of the monitor. The 14 hours remaining would take them exactly to 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Friday. Normally, Friday was the day Beatrice and Eleanor spent executing the bulk of their weekly wedding logistics. They had a scheduled phone conference with the caterer at 9, a call with the rental company to finalize the linen counts at 10, and a virtual meeting with the band manager at noon. All of those contacts were saved on their phones, and all of those vendors used their cellular numbers to reach them. Because Eleanor had ignored the initial transfer request, assuming it was either an automated system error or a bill Clara had simply neglected to pay, neither she nor Beatrice had logged in to create their own accounts. They had done nothing. Clara calculated the timeline. At 8 a.m. tomorrow, their cellular service would stop. Their screens would display "No service" in the top left corner. They would not be able to make calls, receive texts, or access their mobile data. To fix it, they wouldn't be able to just call customer service from their phones. They would have to find a landline or use a Wi-Fi connection to log into the carrier portal or drive to a physical retail store. If they went to the store, they would have to wait in line, present physical identification, run credit checks to set up a new multi-line account, and pay a setup deposit. The entire process would eat up at least 3 to 4 hours of their Friday morning. Clara looked at her brass letter opener resting on the table. Its polished surface reflected the amber sunset, a thin line of gold light cutting across the wood. She could easily log back into the carrier portal and extend the transfer window by another 48 hours. She could send Eleanor a direct email explaining exactly what the notification meant and warning her that her service was about to cut off. But to do that would be to act as the buffer once more. It would be an act of energy she did not want to expend. She closed the carrier email. She opened her design software and began reviewing the typography for the hotel brochure. The work was precise, requiring her to focus entirely on the subtle differences between serif and sans serif fonts, measuring the kerning between letters to ensure perfect legibility. It was a task that demanded her complete, quiet attention, and she welcomed the distraction. As she worked, she heard a soft, muffled vibration from the desk drawer where her muted phone lay. It was a single, short buzz, likely another email transcription of a voicemail or a direct message from someone in the family group chat trying to reach her through an alternative channel. She did not open the drawer. She did not look at the screen. She simply adjusted the spacing between 2 letters on her monitor, watching the pixels shift silently under her stylus, completely detached from the frantic storm brewing just beyond her walls. The high-pitched, clean whistle of the tea kettle began as a low, metallic vibration before rising to a sharp, steady note that filled Clara's small kitchen. She turned the stove dial to off, the blue flame vanishing with a soft whoosh. She lifted the kettle, pouring the boiling water over a dark, dense nest of black tea leaves in her ceramic mug. The steam rose in a rich, bitter plume, warming her face and dampening the skin around her eyes. It was Friday morning, 8:15 a.m. The Friday morning sun was exceptionally bright, cutting a sharp, pale yellow stripe across her white kitchen wall. The apartment was completely, beautifully quiet. There were no vibrations from her desk drawer, no buzzes, no muted hums. Because Eleanor's and Beatrice's phone lines had been deactivated from Clara's group plan at exactly 8 a.m., they could no longer call or text Clara's cellular number. Even if they tried to reach her over their mobile networks, their signals were dead. Clara sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The screen illuminated her face. She logged into her personal email first. 2 automated system notifications sat at the top of her inbox. 1. Mobile carrier, 8:01 a.m. Confirmation of account separation. Lines ending in -4401 and -4402 have been successfully detached from your primary account. Your billing has been adjusted to a single line rate. 2. Google Cloud billing, 8:02 a.m. Payment failed. We were unable to process your monthly payment of $9.99 for account Vance_family_drive using the card ending in -0412. Your account is currently 65 gigabytes over its free limit. Access to the drive has been restricted. Editing, uploading, and sharing privileges are suspended until a valid payment method is provided. Clara took a slow sip of her hot tea, the bitter liquid warming her throat. The double collapse had occurred exactly on schedule. She opened her work email. Amidst her design client messages, there was an email from Melissa, the wedding coordinator, sent at 8:12 a.m. from her professional iPad account. Subject: Urgent. Shared drive locked / contact issues. Clara, Melissa wrote, I'm trying to reach you, but your phone goes straight to voicemail. Actually, Eleanor's and Beatrice's phones are going straight to voicemail too. I'm not sure if there's a local cellular outage, but we have our final menu sync with the caterer in 45 minutes. I went to pull up the master headcount sheet from the shared drive, but I'm getting a billing suspended, read only error page. I can't download the spreadsheet or the food allergy logs. If you can see this, please forward the PDF of the headcount to me immediately. I don't have the caterer's direct contact saved on my iPad. It's all in the drive. Clara read the email, her face remaining entirely neutral in the pale light of her monitor. She could picture the scene in Eleanor's kitchen. Eleanor and Beatrice would be sitting at the marble island, their faces pale and pinched with a growing, frantic confusion. They would be staring at the top left corners of their phone screens, where the words "No service" or "SOS only" had replaced their signal bars. They would be tapping the screens, restarting the devices, accusing the service provider of a system-wide crash, entirely unaware that the 48-hour warning they had ignored was the cause. And when they tried to use Eleanor's iPad to log into the shared wedding drive to find Melissa's phone number or the caterer's email, they would find the folders locked behind a red warning banner demanding a credit card and a password they didn't know. They were completely cut off. Not because Clara had active-aggressively sabotaged them, but because she had simply stopped paying for their lives. She had withdrawn the invisible financial and digital scaffold, and the weight of their own negligence had brought the structure down in a single morning. Clara calculated the cascade. Melissa was a professional. She would eventually find a way to reach the caterer, perhaps by searching her own email archives or calling the main restaurant line. But the menu sync would be delayed. The caterer would be annoyed. The tension between Beatrice and Eleanor would escalate to a fever pitch as they sat in their silent, offline house, unable to blame Clara directly because they couldn't even send her a text. Clara felt a profound, heavy sense of relief. It felt like stepping out of a loud, crowded room into a cold, quiet night. She did not reply to Melissa. She did not forward the guest list PDF, which was saved on her local hard drive. She clicked the box next to Melissa's email, moved her cursor to the top menu, and clicked Archive. The message vanished, leaving her inbox clean, quiet, and entirely hers. She picked up her stylus, opened her hotel brochure layout, and began to adjust the font sizes on the spa menu, her hands steady and relaxed in the bright Friday morning light. The wooden handle of the broom was worn smooth, sliding easily through Clara's palms as she swept the kitchen floor. Swish, swish. She moved in a slow, methodical grid, dragging the coarse black bristles across the oak planks to gather the tiny bits of grit, dried leaf fragments from her window plants, and dust into a neat, gray pile near the refrigerator. She knelt, pressing the lip of the metal dustpan flat against the floor. With a few short, sweeping strokes, she coaxed the debris over the edge. A thin, stubborn line of fine gray dust remained where the pan met the wood, refusing to be swept up. Clara didn't get frustrated. She simply wiped it away with a damp paper towel, throwing the dirt and the paper into the trash can. It was Friday afternoon, 1:30 p.m. The heat of the day was pressing against her window panes, but inside, the apartment remained cool and dim. Clara washed her hands at the sink, the cold water splashing over her wrists, washing away the dry, static feeling of the dust. She walked over to her desk and sat down. She opened her laptop, the screen waking from its sleep mode with a soft hum. In her inbox sat a new email, sent from Eleanor's personal desktop computer at 1:12 p.m. The subject line was blank. Clara clicked it open. "Clara," the email began, "this little temper tantrum has gone entirely too far. We know what you did. We know you moved the $3,800 from the joint account. We know you deactivated our phone lines, and we know you locked the wedding drive. I don't know what kind of game you think you are playing, but it ends today. Beatrice has been crying for 5 hours. She had to drive to the carrier store herself, in tears, and wait in line for 2 hours just to get her phone turned back on so she could talk to the caterer. It cost her $300 in activation fees because she had to set up an entirely new account on her own. The florist has canceled our centerpiece mock-up because they didn't receive the deposit on time, and Melissa is threatening to pull out because she can't access any of our vendor contracts. If this petty behavior is your way of acting out because of your pregnancy issue, you need to grow up. It wasn't even a real baby yet, Clara. You were barely 6 weeks along. Women go through this every day, and they don't use it as an excuse to sabotage their sister's once-in-a-lifetime wedding. Beatrice has worked for 2 years to make this day perfect, and you are ruining it over a minor medical mishap. Julian has already spoken to his uncle, who is a partner at a corporate firm cityside. He says that taking funds from a joint account without authorization can be prosecuted as grand larceny, depending on the state of the deposit. We are giving you until 5 p.m. today to return the $3,800 to the joint account and unlock the shared drive. If you do not, we will call the police, and Julian's uncle will proceed with filing formal charges. Do not test us, Mom. Clara sat perfectly still. The words on the screen seemed to hum with a strange, cold vibration. Pregnancy issue. Not even a real baby yet. Minor medical mishap. She felt a slow, deep chill settle over her shoulders, but her hands on the desk remained steady. There was no sudden heat in her face, no rush of panic, no desire to scream or type a furious, weeping defense of her grief. The metabolic calculation was instant and absolute. The amount of energy required to feel hurt by people who possessed no capacity for empathy was a waste of her biological resources. The final line had been crossed. The bridge was not just burned. The ground where it had stood was salted. She looked at her folder labeled financial_defense. She knew the legal reality. Julian's uncle could be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and it wouldn't change the fact that joint account holders have equal legal access to withdraw funds. More importantly, her meticulously highlighted PDFs and spreadsheets proved that every single cent of the $3,850 was documented, taxable income from her design business, while Eleanor had overdrawn her own contributions by thousands. If the police were called, they would look at the ledger, declare it a civil dispute, and walk away. If Julian tried to file a lawsuit, he would spend $10,000 in legal fees to try and claw back money that didn't belong to them in the first place. They were bluffing. They were bluffing because they were desperate, because the administrative engine of their lives had ground to a halt, and they had no idea how to restart it without her. Clara clicked on her email settings. She went to her rules manager. She created a new filter. If sender is Eleanor Vance, move to trash. If sender is Beatrice Vance, move to trash. If sender is Julian, move to trash. She clicked apply. The email from Eleanor instantly vanished from her inbox, sliding into the digital waste bin where it would be permanently deleted in 30 days. The space on her screen was clean again, filled only with her work emails and a draft layout of the hotel brochure. Clara stood up and walked to the kitchen. She took a glass from the cupboard, filled it with filtered water, and drank it slowly, watching the dust motes drift through the bright, silent shafts of afternoon light on her clean floor. The knife blade made a series of tiny, rhythmic clicks against the wooden cutting board as Clara sliced 3 cloves of garlic. She cut them paper thin, the translucent white discs sticking slightly to the steel blade before she scraped them into a small pile. She slid them into a cold skillet, drizzling 2 tablespoons of olive oil over them. She turned the burner to low, watching the cold oil slowly warm, tiny bubbles beginning to form around the edges of the garlic as it released its rich, pungent aroma into the quiet kitchen. It was Friday evening, 5:12 p.m. The 5 o'clock deadline Eleanor had set in her email had passed 12 minutes ago. Clara stood by the stove, gently swirling the pan to keep the garlic from browning too quickly. Outside, the sky was beginning to soften into a pale, dusty rose, the long shadows of the telephone poles cutting across the asphalt below. A sudden, harsh electric rattle erupted from the small intercom box mounted on her hallway wall. Bzzz. Clara did not jump. Her hand remained steady on the handle of the skillet. She lifted the pan off the burner for a second to control the heat, then set it back down on the low flame. The intercom rattled again, longer this time, a demanding, jagged screech that vibrated through the quiet of her hallway. Bzzz. She set her wooden spoon down and walked slowly into the hall. The small, 4-inch video screen next to the buzzer button was glowing, activated by the call from the lobby vestibule downstairs. Clara pressed the monitor button without lifting the receiver. The grainy, wide-angle camera feed showed Eleanor. Her mother was standing in the narrow, glass-enclosed entry of the apartment building. She was wearing her cream linen trousers, but they were wrinkled, and her hair was starting to slip from her expensive leather barrette. Her face, even through the low-resolution black and white security feed, was visibly flushed, her mouth set in a hard, tight line. She was punching the button for apartment 3B over and over, her manicured thumb hitting the metal contact with an aggressive, rhythmic force. Through the silent feed, Clara watched her mother's lips move. Eleanor was shouting something toward the speaker grid, her chest rising and falling in shallow, angry breaths. Clara stood 3 feet away from the screen, her arms folded across her chest. She calculated the building's physical security. The heavy glass doors of the lobby required an encrypted electronic fob to unlock. The building was small, with only 12 units, and the residents were mostly elderly retirees or quiet professionals who kept to themselves. Eleanor could not simply slip inside unless another resident happened to exit while she was standing there. Even if Eleanor managed to enter the building, Clara's apartment door was a solid, fire-rated slab of heavy oak, secured by a 3-inch steel deadbolt. Clara looked at the side of the white intercom box. Near the bottom edge was a small plastic toggle switch labeled Ringer Volume. She reached out, her finger catching the rough plastic, and slid the toggle all the way to the bottom. The third buzzer blast cut off mid-screech, dying into a dull, flat silence. The screen remained glowing, displaying the silent, black-and-white image of Eleanor. Her mother was now leaning her forehead against the glass of the door, her hand resting on the call box, as if she were exhausted, her eyes scanning the dark street behind her. Without her cellular signal, she couldn't call a locksmith. She couldn't call Julian's uncle. She couldn't even call Beatrice to complain without standing in the drafty vestibule, attempting to use the lobby's public Wi-Fi on her tablet. She was a wealthy woman in a chaotic state, reduced to tapping her nails against a locked glass door in a quiet neighborhood. Clara turned away from the monitor. She walked back into the kitchen, where the garlic was just beginning to turn a pale golden yellow. She poured a cup of dried pasta into a pot of boiling, heavily salted water, the water rising in a thick cloud of hot steam that smelled of wheat and salt. She stood by the stove, stirring the pasta slowly, her back to the hallway. She did not check the monitor again. She did not look to see if Eleanor was still downstairs, or if she had finally given up and driven her silver SUV back to her sprawling, silent house. She simply listened to the quiet, rhythmic bubbling of the water, a clean, steady sound that belonged entirely to her Friday night. The cast-iron skillet was still warm to the touch as Clara dried it with a thick, gray dish towel. She rubbed her thumb over the dark, seasoned surface of the iron, ensuring there was no moisture left in the rivets of the handle. She hung the pan on its steel hook on the pantry wall, the metal giving a single, quiet clink against the plaster before settling into stillness. It was Friday night, 10:15 p.m. The apartment was filled with the cool, clean scent of the evening air coming through the cracked window, carrying the distant, muted rumble of the highway 2 miles away. Clara walked to her desk. The small green light on her building's wall-mounted security system had turned solid, indicating the lobby vestibule downstairs was empty and locked for the night. Eleanor had been gone for hours. Clara sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She did not open her inbox. She did not check the trash folder to see if Eleanor, Beatrice, or Julian had sent further threats. She had no need to read their escalating panic. Instead, she opened her local files and selected 3 documents: the highlighted PDF ledger she had compiled yesterday, the spreadsheet detailing Eleanor's negative balance, and the high-definition video clip she had downloaded from her building's security portal, which clearly showed Eleanor aggressively pounding on the glass lobby doors at 5:12 p.m. She created a new email message. She addressed it to Eleanor. She carbon-copied Beatrice and Julian. She attached the financial documents and the video file. She did not write a long, emotional explanation. She did not mention her miscarriage. She did not accuse them of cruelty or demand an apology for the minor medical mishap comment. To do so would be to offer them her vulnerability, a currency they had long ago proven they did not deserve. Her metabolic restraint was absolute. She kept her language as cold, clinical, and dry as a corporate audit. Eleanor, she wrote, attached you will find the complete audited statement of the joint savings account ending in 8821 for the last 36 months. My design firm's deposits are highlighted in yellow. Your withdrawals are highlighted in red. The $3,850 transferred on Wednesday represents the exact remainder of my documented personal earnings. Your remaining balance of $227 is correct. There is no larceny. Also attached is the security video from my building's lobby at 5:12 p.m. today. Your attempt to force entry has been logged by the building's management company. If you, Beatrice, or Julian make any further unannounced visits to my residence, contact my landlord, or threaten legal action, I will immediately file for a civil harassment restraining order. I have retained legal representation. Any further communication regarding this matter, or any other family logistical issues, must be directed solely to my attorney, Sarah Jenkins, at the contact information listed below. Do not contact me again. Clara. She added the phone number and email address of a college classmate who specialized in contract and civil law, a woman she had called on Thursday afternoon to secure a standard retainer. Sarah had looked at Clara's financial spreadsheets and laughed, calling the larceny threat embarrassing and promising to handle any further contact with a single, devastating cease and desist letter. Clara moved her mouse to the top right corner of the screen. She hovered the cursor over the send button. Her hand was perfectly steady, her breathing slow and even in the dark room. She clicked. A tiny blue progress bar appeared at the bottom of her browser window. Sending. For a fraction of a second, the screen flickered, and then the box vanished. Message sent. Clara closed the laptop lid. The screen went dark, her own reflection disappearing from the black glass, replaced by the quiet, soft shadows of her room. She calculated the silence that would descend on Eleanor's house tomorrow morning. Julian would show the email to his uncle, the corporate partner, who would look at the highlighted bank statements and immediately tell Julian that they had absolutely no case. He would warn Eleanor that Clara's threat of a civil harassment restraining order was legally viable, especially with the security footage, and that any further contact could ruin Beatrice's wedding plans if it became a matter of public record. They would have to back down. They would have to crawl back into their own space, their legal bluffs shattered, their empty threats exposed. And most importantly, they would finally understand that the buffer was gone. The tap had not just run dry, the well had been boarded up and locked. Clara stood up and walked to her bedroom. She climbed into her bed, the clean linen sheets cool against her skin. She lay on her side, her knees tucked slightly toward her stomach, her hands resting quietly beneath her pillow. For the first time in years, the silence of the night did not feel heavy or suffocating. It felt wide, deep, and entirely her own. The manual coffee grinder felt heavy and cold in Clara's hands, the smooth walnut body fitting snugly into her palm. She poured a handful of dark, oily espresso beans into the steel hopper, the dry beans clinking against the metal. She attached the brass crank handle and began to turn it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The resistance was steady and stubborn at first, requiring a rhythmic, physical effort that traveled up her forearm before the gears caught and the beans began to yield, releasing a rich, warm aroma of roasted chocolate and hazelnut into the quiet kitchen. It was Saturday morning, 8:45 a.m. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint, sweet smell of cut grass from the park down the street. Clara ground the beans until the resistance vanished and the handle spun freely. She unscrewed the bottom chamber, pouring the dark, fragrant grounds into the paper filter of her ceramic dripper. She set the kettle to boil, sat down at her desk, and opened her laptop. Her personal inbox was entirely empty of family names. The filters she had set yesterday were working silently in the background, diverting any frantic, capital-letter emails from Eleanor, Beatrice, or Julian directly into the digital waste bin, where they could do no harm. However, there was a new message from Sarah Jenkins, Esquire, sent at 8:12 a.m. Clara, Sarah wrote, I received a call from Julian's uncle, Arthur Vance, about 45 minutes ago. He was extremely professional, highly apologetic, and made it clear that he has advised his nephew and Eleanor to drop any discussion of legal recourse immediately. He reviewed the highlighted bank statements I forwarded last night and confirmed to them that they have no case. The matter of the joint account is officially dead. However, they are in an absolute panic. Arthur told me that the wedding coordinator, Melissa, has threatened to formally terminate her contract today. Apparently, without access to the master guest lists, seating charts, and vendor contracts on the locked Google Drive, she cannot coordinate the florist's reschedule or the caterer's final headcount. They are paralyzed. Arthur asked if you would be willing to simply log in and transfer the primary ownership of the Vance_family_drive folder to Beatrice's personal email so they can recover their documents. How do you want to proceed? Clara stared at the email, her face illuminated by the clean, blue-gray light of the monitor. She took a slow, deep breath. The water in the kettle began to simmer, a low, gentle bubbling sound that filled the small kitchen. She calculated the weight of her invisible labor. For nearly 3 years, she had been the sole architect of Beatrice's wedding infrastructure. She had spent hundreds of hours of her unbilled personal time designing those spreadsheets, coordinating with the vendors, securing the group rates, and formatting the guest lists. They had treated her availability as a natural resource, like tap water, and when she had dried up, they had called her selfish and threatened her with grand larceny. Now they wanted the resource back. They wanted her to hand over the keys to the digital fortress she had built for them, for free, so they could continue their lives without her while pretending she had never existed. But Clara was a freelance designer. She understood the value of intellectual property. She understood that you do not hand over native project files to a client who has refused to pay the invoice. She typed a reply to Sarah. "Sarah," she wrote, "thank you for the update. I am glad the legal threats have been resolved. Regarding the Google Drive, the folder structure, spreadsheets, and master vendor databases are my proprietary intellectual property, created using my personal software licenses and unbilled administrative labor. I will not transfer the ownership of the drive for free. If they wish to secure the master files, they may purchase the data migration package from me. The flat fee is $2,500, payable immediately via bank wire to my business account. Once the funds have cleared, I will log in, transfer primary ownership of the master wedding folder to Beatrice's email, and permanently delete my own access. If they choose not to purchase the files, the Google account will remain locked. Under the expired card currently on file, the drive is scheduled for permanent read-only suspension on Tuesday morning, and the files will be queued for deletion. Please forward this offer to Arthur Vance. The price is non-negotiable, and I will not entertain any payment plans. Thank you, Clara." She clicked send. The email vanished from her screen. Clara stood up and walked back to the kitchen. The water in the kettle had reached a full boil, the steam rising in a silent, thick column. She lifted the kettle and began to pour the hot water over the coffee grounds in a slow, circular motion, watching the dark crust swell and bubble as the rich, dark liquid began to drip slowly into the glass carafe below. She felt a quiet, profound sense of space. She was no longer angry. She was no longer hurt by the cruelty of their emails or the dismissiveness of her grief. She had moved past the emotional territory entirely, entering a cold, clean landscape of business. If they wanted her labor, they would have to pay her invoice. And if they couldn't afford it, they would have to build their world from scratch. The coffee was dark and rich, a thin layer of hazelnut-colored crema clinging to the inside of the white porcelain mug. Clara held the cup with both hands, feeling the heat sink deep into her palms. Outside, a soft, warm summer rain had begun to fall, the tiny drops pattering gently against the glass of her open window and releasing the fresh, clean scent of wet brick and damp earth into her living room. It was Saturday afternoon, 2:15 p.m. Clara sat at her desk, her laptop open before her. Her tablet, lying flat on the wooden surface next to her water glass, illuminated with a silent, glowing notification from her business banking application. She tapped the screen. Transaction notification, wire transfer received. Sender, Arthur Vance Legal Trust. Amount, $2,500, completed/cleared. Clara looked at the numbers. The funds were already fully cleared and settled into her business checking account, designated as a business administrative services payment. A moment later, an email from Sarah Jenkins arrived in her inbox. "Clara," Sarah's message read, "the wire has cleared on my end as well, and I have received the signed release of liability and data transfer agreement from Arthur Vance. They have agreed to all terms. Arthur noted that his clients, Eleanor and Beatrice, specifically requested that you do not contact them directly to confirm the transfer, as they are deeply hurt by this transaction. I assured him that would not be an issue, as you have no intention of contacting them. You are legally clear to transfer the files and remove yourself from the drive. You did it, Clara. You are officially free." Deeply hurt. Clara read the words, but they felt distant, like a language she had forgotten how to speak. Eleanor and Beatrice were hurt because they had been forced to recognize the financial and practical value of her labor. They were hurt because they could no longer exploit her under the guise of family obligation, and because their threats of legal force had been shattered by a simple, highlighted ledger. She opened her browser and logged into the Google Cloud account using the Family Drive credentials. The screen displayed the master folder, Vance_family_drive. She clicked on the sharing settings. She scrolled down the list of users until she found Beatrice's personal email address. She clicked the drop-down menu next to Beatrice's name and selected Make Owner. A standard system prompt appeared in the center of her screen. Transfer ownership? Once you transfer ownership of this folder, the new owner can change sharing permissions and remove your access. You will no longer be able to delete the files. Clara did not hesitate. Her hand was perfectly steady as she clicked Yes. The screen blinked. Beatrice's email was now listed as the primary owner. Next, Clara went to her own name on the user list. She clicked the small icon to the right and selected Remove Access. The final prompt appeared. Remove yourself? You will lose access to this folder immediately and will not be able to retrieve any files within it. Clara clicked Confirm. The window refreshed. The screen was empty. The folders containing the guest list, the seating charts, the catering invoices, the florist contracts, and 3 years of Eleanor's tax files vanished from her interface, leaving only a clean gray screen with the words, No folders found. She closed the browser. The physical sensation that followed was not one of triumph or cold revenge. It was simply the feeling of a heavy, wet coat being slipped off her shoulders after a long walk in the rain. She felt light, cool, and remarkably empty. By removing her access, she had completed the communication blackout. She had blocked their numbers on her phone. She had set her email filters to send their messages directly to the trash. She had removed herself from their bank accounts, their phone plans, and their digital storage. Without her there to act as the buffer, the family system would now have to run on its own steam. Without her to soothe Beatrice's panics, Eleanor and Beatrice would have to face each other directly. They would argue over the seating charts, the linen budgets, and the menu cards. They would blame each other for the missing contracts and the late deposits. Without Clara to absorb the friction, the heat between them would rise until the relationships destroyed themselves from the inside out. But Clara would not be there to watch the fire. She would not be there to sweep up the ashes. She closed her laptop lid, the soft latch clicking shut in the quiet room. She picked up her porcelain mug, the coffee still warm, and walked over to her kitchen window. She leaned against the frame, watching the rain fall over the quiet street below, her face catching the cool, damp breeze. Her apartment was silent, her phone was dark, and her time, for the first time in her life, belonged entirely to her. The blade of the paring knife sank easily into the flesh of a ripe strawberry, parting it with a soft, wet sound. Clara sliced the green top off, then cut the red berry into neat, even quarters, dropping them one by one into a blue ceramic bowl of warm oatmeal. The sweet, slightly warm scent of the fresh fruit rose with the steam of the oats, clean and comforting in the morning air. It was Sunday morning, 9:15 a.m. The apartment was flooded with a bright, pale yellow light that slanted across her wooden floorboards, highlighting the quiet stillness of the room. A gentle breeze came through the half-open window, moving the hem of her linen curtains back and forth in a slow, silent rhythm. Clara poured a small splash of cold cream into the bowl, watching the white liquid swirl and marble through the dark oats. She carried her breakfast to her desk, sat down, and opened her laptop to organize her freelance design schedule for the upcoming week. In her professional inbox sat an email sent late Saturday night at 9:42 p.m. The sender was Melissa. "Dear Clara," the email began, "I wanted to reach out to you directly and professionally using your business address. As of 8 o'clock this evening, I have officially submitted my resignation as the coordinator for Beatrice's wedding to Eleanor and Beatrice. Following the administrative and communication disruptions of the past week, we had an extended 3-hour meeting yesterday afternoon to review the transition of the Google Drive master files. Unfortunately, without you acting as our primary point of contact and logistics manager, the gaps in the planning structure have become too wide for my team to bridge. The level of administrative disorganization and the conflicting instructions I received from Eleanor and Beatrice yesterday have made it impossible for us to maintain our professional standards. I wanted to thank you personally for your hard work, your incredible attention to detail, and your steady hand over the last several months. You were an absolute pleasure to collaborate with, and I have no doubt your professional design business will continue to thrive. I wish you nothing but the absolute best. Warmly, Melissa." Clara read the email slowly, her face remaining entirely neutral in the soft morning light. She took a spoonful of her oatmeal. The fruit was sweet, the cream cold and rich. She calculated the cascade of Melissa's resignation. In the high-end wedding industry, coordinators of Melissa's caliber were booked 12 to 18 months in advance. Losing a coordinator 6 weeks before a peak season summer wedding was a catastrophic blow. No other reputable firm would take on a client at this late stage, especially once they learned that a professional like Melissa had resigned due to communication disruptions. Without Melissa, the scaffolding of the entire event was gone. Eleanor and Beatrice were now entirely on their own. They would have to manage the catering coordinators, the florist's timeline, the band's soundcheck requirements, the transportation manifests, and the linen rentals. They would have to do it using the master files Clara had transferred, but neither of them knew how to read the complex spreadsheets Clara had built, nor did they understand the subtle, delicate agreements she had negotiated with the vendors in the background. Clara could see the immediate aftermath. Eleanor would blame Beatrice's frantic behavior for driving Melissa away. Beatrice would accuse Eleanor of being overbearing and losing the florist contract. Julian would grow increasingly quiet, retreating further into his work to avoid the screaming matches in Eleanor's kitchen. The family system, lacking its quiet, stabilizing buffer, was collapsing exactly as she had predicted, under the sheer weight of its own chaotic dysfunction. And she had not had to say a single word. She had not had to defend her grief. She had not had to argue or beg for their understanding, or scream at them for minimizing the loss of her child. She had simply stepped out of the frame, and the frame had broken itself. Clara clicked on her email settings. She moved Melissa's email into a folder labeled professional_contacts. She closed her email client. She opened her design workspace, the clean, minimalist lines of the hotel brochure layout filling her screen. She selected a pale blue color palette for the spa's pricing menu, her fingers moving steadily across the trackpad, her mind completely at peace. The rain from yesterday had left the world outside looking washed and bright, and the quiet of her apartment was a deep, cool well she was glad to drown in. The key was solid brass, its edges slightly tarnished from 3 years of sitting against the heavy steel ring of her car keys. It was the spare key to Eleanor's house, the sprawling, 5-bedroom chaotic estate where Clara had spent her youth, and where she had spent the last several years smoothing over every cracked glass, every unpaid invoice, and every family fracture. It was Sunday afternoon, 4 p.m. Clara stood on the narrow pedestrian footbridge over the city canal, a mile from her apartment. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and the green, wild ivy growing along the stone retaining walls. Below her, the surface of the water was a deep, opaque olive, moving in slow, silent eddies that caught the soft gray reflection of the afternoon clouds. She held the brass key between her thumb and index finger. She did not feel angry. She did not feel a sudden rush of dramatic finality. She simply squeezed the small wire loop of her key ring, slid the brass key off the ring, and let it go. It fell in a clean vertical line. There was a tiny hollow plop as it hit the water, followed by a single silvery bubble that rose to the surface and popped silently. The key sank into the dark, cold depths, disappearing completely beneath the green silt of the canal floor. It was gone. Clara adjusted her scarf, tucking her hands into the deep pockets of her trench coat. She felt the cool wind off the water against her face, clean and light. The silence that now surrounded her was not an empty space, it was a fortress. By withdrawing her labor, her finances, her digital coordinates, and her emotional presence, she had left Eleanor and Beatrice to face the reality of their own making. Melissa's resignation was only the first card to fall in a house that had been built on the unpaid, unappreciated foundation of Clara's life. The summer wedding would either go on as a stressed, bitter affair in a half-empty room, or it would collapse entirely under the weight of their mutual recriminations. But Clara would never know, because she had closed the door, locked it, and thrown the key into the river. Sometimes the most devastating boundaries are not the ones fought for with screams and tears. They are the ones established in the absolute quiet of a Sunday afternoon, when you simply decide that you have paid enough and you walk away. They thought she was the tap water. They never realized she was the reservoir. And now the reservoir had run dry, leaving them to thirst in the desert of their own design. If you found peace in Clara's journey of quiet boundaries, self-preservation, and the slow, inevitable return of natural balance, we invite you to join us. Please take a moment to subscribe to Crazy Karma Stories. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our long-form, immersive psychological dramas. Let us know in the comments below. How would you have handled Eleanor's demands? And at what point would you have walked away? Share your thoughts, protect your peace, and join a community of listeners who understand that sometimes silence is the most powerful response of all. Until next time, keep your boundaries high, your mind quiet, and let the universe do the rest.